I am HO Talk Show, and as promised, still here. We still standing, y'all, just as we always do. And we are joined, as promised, bottom of the show. We are with none other than the Director of Community Initiatives at the Virginia Humanities, Mr. Justin Reid. Justin, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
Did you hear that theme music that he brought Justin out with? I was over here rhyming myself. I said, "Gosh almighty, Justin must be somebody."
That was perfect, actually. My family has a long history in Philadelphia International Records, and so
nice.
It sounded like home.
Yeah, man. Good stuff, brother. And also, man, what does my heart good, and it also lets us know that we have even more work to do here, is that, like, you're a brother that I've seen in different circles. You know what I mean? Like, you're one of those people that stays involved. And when I learned of your position after hearing you, giving different presentation speeches, first couple of times of just meeting your acquaintance, I didn't even really know what it was that you did. But thank you for your work. And that just shows the depth of what we have here in Central Virginia and in Charlottesville, and how we need to really highlight that more. And hopefully through IMHO, CVille Tomorrow, Vinegar Hill Magazine, we will be doing just that, so folks know on an international scale, the depth of knowledge and blackness that we have here in CVille.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm a big fan. I listen every Sunday. My wife yells at me sometimes. I have it up so loud. Usually, I think it's Troy is the one yelling a little bit.
You need Max to talk to him for you?
Wait for Max to come through, bring in the calmness and
there you go.
Get everybody on track.
There you go. Up, you really do listen. You know that.
You really do listen. He humbled me there for a second.
Yeah. Hey, man. But so without further ado, I guess let's start by just giving the folks an introductory of your office and the work that you do, and then we can dig in, to the politics of the 5th District.
Yeah, so my official title is Director of Community Initiatives at Virginia Humanities. And, Virginia Humanities is headquartered in Charlottesville. We work around the state. And primarily what we do is we try to promote, cultural education, history education. We award grants to a lot of organizations, museums, libraries. But we also produce a lot of our own content, a lot of our own programming. So for folks who live in Charlottesville, the annual book festival, the Virginia Festival of the Book, is something that we put on every year. We help put on the Richmond Folk Fest in Richmond. But today, I guess I'm representing Virginia Humanities. If I do end up getting political, those opinions do not necessarily reflect my organization or any other organization I'm affiliated with, or any members of my family. So
there you go.
I need to put that out there.
Your humble opinions.
My opinion. Thank you.
Yeah, man. So it's election season, and from your work, let's really start. Let's go ahead and bite into it, man. It's like, why is this election so important for you this year? Why are you, out publicly educating folks about this 5th District?
Oh man, I think we have a historic opportunity right now in the 5th District, especially really across the country. But when I think about kind of where I grew up, I grew up in Farmville, and I can trace, I guess at this point, maybe 8 different generations of my family, my Black ancestors, I'll say back to Buckingham County, Prince Edward County, Cumberland County. And I think as a district, we really have an opportunity to really show the world kind of what we're capable of, to maybe disprove some of the stereotypes people have, especially about the southern region of the 5th District where I grew up. It is very rural. It is relatively Black when you compare it to places like Charlottesville. Charlottesville, I think 20% Black. You get to some of these other southern counties, you're looking at anywhere between 30 and 50% Black. And I think we have political strength. We have a history, we have a tradition of flexing our political muscle. And I think it's time for people to pay attention to the 5th District and pay more attention to Southside Virginia, and specifically Black Southside Virginia. So I'm excited to see what we can do.
Yeah. Now, what about the impact of to the 5th District? Like, when we look at who's running here, what's on the table right now? Because I believe Charlotte Giles, as a matter of fact, Charlotte from CVille Tomorrow educated us on a piece there where, when it comes to redistricting, that's that's an amendment on this year's ballot on having like a nonpartisan committee to make the redistricting the decision. So I'm curious on that one front of what's so important this year about the 5th district, and then after that we can dig a little deeper into the history of it.
Yeah, so I mean, the 5th district is one of the most, it's one of the worst gerrymandered districts in Virginia right now.
Explain what gerrymander is for the people that don't know.
So I mean, when we're talking about gerrymandering a district, you're trying to carve out localities to benefit particular parties, and so you really create kind of the zigzag of a map, and so that you're cutting out certain cities, but trying to capture certain portions of a city or capture certain portions of a county, but the map that we currently have, I believe it was written. I know it was written up by the last Republican-controlled legislator that we had, and so there's been a lot of debate around the future of these districts. The census, it's incredibly important that we always make sure we turn out for the census, because the census numbers are what gets used to determine the makeup of these districts. But up until recently, I mean, there has been a lot of kind of investment in the status quo. Both Republicans and Democrats have been happy having these districts gerrymandered because it benefited, both parties in different ways. And so now we're having this conversation. We need fair districts. We need to make sure that these races are competitive, and we don't want to water down, especially the Black vote. I think in a lot of cases, what you see happening is that, the Black vote is underrepresented, or in some cases overrepresented because of how the districts are carved up. And we want people to make sure that, no matter where you live, your vote is going to be fought for. Republicans and Democrats are going to fight to reflect the issues that you care about. And right now, a lot of our districts make that impossible.
I just interviewed Dr. Wes Bellamy, and he made a comment that Democrats can't win without us and Republicans can't win if we vote. How do you think that affects the 5th district with looking at Southside, like you said, if we look at it from that point of view?
Yeah, so let's see. If we're looking at the 5th district, we're talking about Fauquier County, so kind of Northern Virginia on through Charlottesville. It takes you, all the way down to the North Carolina border. And so you're getting a lot of rural counties, you're getting a lot of, historically Black counties. And I remember the primary election night when Democrats were trying to determine who was going to be running for Congress. This was back in June. And the first thing I did, I wanted to see the breakdown by locality. I wasn't really interested in Charlottesville, honestly. And Charlottesville, it can be pretty predictable when it comes to elections. Albemarle County too. I wanted to see the results in Southern Virginia. How were these numbers coming out, by locality there? And what you saw was pretty extraordinary. So in this case, the Democratic primary, you have Dr. Cameron Webb winning every single locality in the 5th district. But what I think is even more remarkable, if you base it solely on percentages, he did better in these rural Southern Virginia counties than he did in Charlottesville and Albemarle County. And so in my mind, a lot of that has to do with the enthusiasm and the excitement of Black voters in these counties, again, that are 30 to 50% Black. They're energized, they're excited, and you can't win this district with Charlottesville alone. You need energy in the rest of the district if you hope to get to Congress.
I think that if I can, y'all, well, what he just now said about the percentages being in rural areas, because you don't normally think about that because a lot of our white counterparts own a large portion of the land. Yeah. But you got to realize if Mr. John owned 500 acres, but then he has 40 Black people living on his property, that's 40 votes versus that one vote. And I really didn't pick that up until he was talking just now.
Yeah.
That's a big fact. And ladies and gentlemen, if you just joined us, we are joined by Mr. Justin Reid, Director of Director of Community Initiatives at the Virginia Humanities. Giles has a question for you, Justin.
Yeah, just one of the things I'm interested in, Justin, is just like, apart from your family's history in the Fifth and in Farm Bill activism, historic preservation with Moat Museum, I mean, you just have this incredible view of Virginia politics now through your job, because you get around. You, with all the monument work you're doing, you're in different parts of the state. And I guess, I'm just curious what your take is on sort of Black politics in Virginia right now. You talked about the Fifth a little bit, but, whether it's, Richmond and the mayor, whatever the next mayoral election there, or the governor, candidates lining up for the governor's race, or, some of the, more local stuff. What's your view of where Black voters are focused? What are they trying to see in candidates? And what is your kind of, I guess, opinion of sort of if there's a real consistency of framework among Black voters around the state, as different as the localities are? Right.
So, Giles alluded to this prior to the pandemic. My job primarily was traveling the state. I was kind of, on the road more than I was in the office. Mm-hmm. And, having this experience and seeing, all of these different communities, I can honestly and confidently say that, really there is no like single kind of Black kind of political viewpoint within Virginia. I think is very regionally specific. And so the 757, right, is going to look very different than Southside. Northern Virginia, Northern Virginia, you have a very transient Black community that's connected to the federal government. A lot of people, recently relocated there, and it's more suburban, whereas, Southside Virginia, it is more rural, right? But you also have, generations of family that are landowners. You have folks that are commuting to Danville, Martinsville for work, even Richmond in some cases. You have 757, which, that in many ways is kind of the mecca of kind of the Black urban identity right now in Virginia. A lot of those families are also tied to the military. And so, of course, that's going to shape, their attitudes toward politics. When you're talking about, which candidate is going to fund the military, which one is going to, cause jobs to be reduced because of lack of funding. So it varies. And I think that's an important thing that we have to get across. We often talk about, the Black vote. We talk about the Black vote as if like it's something you can, you can go to the grocery store and you can buy, and then you pick off. I want the Black vote, and I'm gonna pull it off the shelf.
Hey, Justin, they used to show up at the churches thinking they could do that.
Still do.
Show up at the church and say, "Yeah, let me buy this Black vote real quick."
And we are a beautiful, and we are complicated, and we are a dynamic and diverse people, right? And you obviously the thing we have in common is like this battle against white supremacy and how that's affected our life outcomes and our opportunities. But when you talk about us, in a cultural sense, when you talk about our histories, there's a lot of variety based on where you are in the state. And Southside Virginia specifically is unique because of the history of tobacco production. In the Black Belt region, you have people that describe Southside as being, the closest thing Virginia has to the Deep South. Comparing it to Alabama, comparing Mississippi. But I think in describing it that way, we also kind of miss out on the really kind of proud tradition that exists, in these predominantly Black rural spaces. And I think we can't overlook, the pride that people still have today.
Yeah. Hey, Justin, let's, what that takes my mind to is a big question, a big conversation is always, when it comes to these national elections, the presidential elections, is how the popular vote and electoral vote opposes each other some little too often. And if I'm not mistaken, when it happened in 2000, it like rarely ever was even in consideration before because it just never caused the issue. Like, if you can break that down for people to understand the difference between the popular vote and the electoral college, and like how that plays out, like even within this area, within the 5th district.
Yeah. So, you're talking about the electoral college, and that's the part of this legacy of slavery and kind of white planters wanting to actually exert more power in the voting process. You're talking about, the 3/5 compromise, which is what, it boils down to with the electoral college. Instead of having elections determined by the number of votes, each state is allocated a number of, let's call it points, right? That's based on the population size. And so the direct democracy doesn't exist. It's something that, I think a lot of people would argue is actually pretty undemocratic, right? So, let's go back to the Three-Fifths Compromise. A lot of people think about, this compromise between slave owners as being something that recognize Black people as being 3/5 of a person. But if you really think about kind of the twisted logic that went into that decision,
Right.
You have, Southern plantation owners, like, our very own Thomas Jefferson, right? They're arguing that we should have greater representation because of the enslaved people who are in our state. And you have, non-slave voting states or states that have fewer enslaved people saying, enslaved people shouldn't count because they're not citizens. They're not really humans.
Right.
And you have Southern plantations owners say, wait a minute, okay, maybe they won't count completely, but they should at least be 3/5. And in a way, you're able to kind of, rig the system in a very clever way that gives the U.S. South and you give plantation owning states much more power than we really should have when it comes to national politics. And we're still operating within that system today.
Yeah.
That is a complete repercussion of Southern slave owners wanting to retain power by arguing that we're not going to have a direct democracy based on every individual vote. We're going to allocate a certain number of votes to each state based on population, and we're going to have enslaved people count as 3/5 so that our numbers are higher than northern states and non-slave voting states. So again, I am not a constitutional expert, but I will say this.
But you did a great job, though.
Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you. People are having that conversation, and you see people talk about the Electoral College much more now, I think, than you ever did in the past. And they're saying this is something that we need to take a look at. It's the reason why, places like, California, right? That it has, I'm pretty sure California might be the largest state in the country.
I think so. Yeah.
Yet, their political power is so diminished because of how we count votes in this country. They're disadvantaged in so many ways. And what would it look like without an electoral college? What would it look like, without, these congressional districts carved up the way they are? It would be a situation where the majority of people would be voting, and every single vote would count the same way.
Sometimes you hear something that you just want to fight. You make you want to hit somebody in the mouth.
It is what it is, Mr.
You know what I'm saying? Like, we start hitting 3/4 of man.
Well, Reid, I mean, Justin, I think that's a really, really amazing, deep and simple explanation of the Electoral College, how it came to be and where it was baked into the Constitution and what it means in terms of the truth of how our democracy actually started, right? Which is that it was always designed with slavery in mind, so that we've never even come close to having a pure democracy. There's no such thing. No country has. Our country has become is far this. I guess as a sort of devil's advocate, I would say that that balance, though, between the pure popular vote and state representation, also, their logic was that it balanced, a country in a way that helped it respect its rural priorities or agrarian priorities. Whether we accept that or not, the divide between the fear of the mega cities dominating all political conversation is one that's been sold to people as a way of preserving the system. What do you think about that? Which is that, we have these blue megalopolises and these red country. And if you look at the fifth, are people's priorities the same? Can the government serve rural and urban centers the same and represent them the same? To me, I care more about Congress being fair and fighting the fight through Congress, because there is a lot of power baked into Congress in the Constitution.
So, I mean, Giles, I honestly don't even see you as really playing devil's advocate, because I think, you're talking about kind of rural priorities and why this was established in the first place. I mean, rural priorities at that time, right, was slavery. That was the number one rural priority, to preserve the institution of slavery and ensure that people who own and enslaved people had, a disproportionate amount of power when it came to politics in this country. But earlier I said, my family can trace its roots to Southside, for at least 8 generations, and that's not considering possible white ancestors or indigenous ancestors, or whatever. I'm talking about Black ancestors, 8 generations to a single place. And that includes stints in DC, Baltimore, Philly.
Lucky, honestly.
New York. Mm-hmm. And we can get into that. I mean, we can say lucky, but it's a complicated family history. But, having grown up in rural Virginia, rural South, but having cousins all over the country, spending summers, outside of Southside, having aunts and relatives all over the place. I don't necessarily think that the major priorities are that different, right, between rural and urban communities. I think, ultimately, right, we're talking about education, we're talking about jobs, we're talking about healthcare, we're talking about protection of civil rights, we're talking about policing. I mean, those are issues that cut across geography, no matter where you are. And so I think, one of the things that I would like people to think about more is actually realizing that today, and looking at how interconnected we are, a lot of the challenges that we find in urban areas are also found in rural communities. And I think, unfortunately, we have a lot of people that still think of rural communities as being kind of this, pristine, rural, like rural farming industry. People are not farming like that, Nah. My dad is the last generation in my family to grow tobacco. I never had that life, but I would go to Richmond like it was nothing. I have friends that would drive with me to Richmond, and we would go out in Richmond and hang out in Richmond. And so I think the lines are a little bit blurred between urban and rural, but obviously racism and white supremacy is universal. So if we can tackle that, we will see kind of improvement across the board.
Hey, Justin, I think you found the new N word when you said 3/5 a man. That been locked my mind up for the last 10 years. Because I mean, heard nothing else. The electoral college, like I was never taught in school the breakdown by which he just gave. You know what I'm saying? Because that definitely would have caught my attention. Like, don't tell me about Monticello, Montpelier, nothing else. Tell me about this 3/5 of a man that we still use today in order to suppress certain people and give other people power. That definitely would have took my, you know what I'm saying? I would have been in politics in high school had I known about that. So, I mean, they do a good job of miseducating us about what really is going on.
Right. And it's because of this decision, right, that's, southern states have had, considerably more power than they should have. That's the issue we run up against, really. And we're still kind of living through the consequences, of this decision that was made to give power to southern states when the numbers were not in the South's favor. If we were only counting, white male voting citizens at that time, because, everyone else didn't count, basically, except for the 3/5 of your property, right?
And Justin, so when you travel to these areas, especially the ones that you say are like as much as 50% Black, are you, when we talk about things like having the vote suppressed, removing post office boxes and different things like that, are you finding that they are still that they're facing these type of issues too? Has that rose to the level of complaints or being reported or what have you? I mean, I know just recently in where I live at, they found 2 votes in a ditch near somebody's yard.
2 bags.
Yeah.
Wow.
Was it 2 bags?
2 bags.
Wow.
So I can't really speak to, kind of overt voter suppression that's happening. I've heard the stories of yard signs being torn up, like right near my family church, there were some signs that were torn up supporting, one candidate. One of the issues in rural Southside is going to be simply getting to the polls. I mean, you're talking about, driving considerable distances in many cases to get to the polls. So then, when you're talking about having to drive somewhere in places that don't have, adequate public transportation, then you're talking about having to own a car. And then, you're thinking about the issue of, okay, then who does and doesn't have a car? And particularly right now in the pandemic, typically you would see a lot of churches and church vans coming out, picking up people, taking them to the polls. Is that going to be happening now that we're in the middle of a pandemic? Can these churches mobilize their congregations in the same way they did in the past, given the distance that people have to overcome in order to vote? But I will say this, in every election that I've voted back home, I've never once had to stand in line. I never once had to wait longer than 10 minutes to vote. So some of the things you see when it comes to voting in urban places are non-existent in a lot of rural places. But what I am concerned about is people's ability to simply get there physically. Right? 'Cause you can't just simply catch a ride. You have to really have a plan if you don't have your own transportation, or you can't just leave work and think it's going to be a kind of a quick in and out to get to a polling place.
Yeah, it's facts. It's facts. Hey, Justin, if you don't mind, if you have a few more minutes, we'll take a quick break, and maybe you can even hang with us as we close out the show. But I know you did a lot of great work when it comes to the monuments and whatnot too, and we kind of just graze the surface of that. So if you want to, give the update of where that left off, we'd love to hear that as well.
Okay.
Yeah, but ladies and gentlemen from Virginia Humanities, Justin Reid. Y'all don't go nowhere. IMHO. IMHO Talk Show, y'all. Still here, still standing. To close out the show, man, y'all, thank y'all for listening as always. We're still here with Justin Reid of Virginia Humanities, still Sir Charles, Miss Max, Razor A. Aaron, Giles from Seaville tomorrow. And so, like we'd be, remiss if we didn't get you to elaborate on the great work that you've been doing. I know you had a particular project when it comes to the historic monuments, statues, what have you, here in Virginia. So to bring the people up to speed on that, I think would be crucial. And I'll let you introduce that work, and then I have a specific question for you.
In recent years, the issue of monuments has definitely, become front and center. I mean, we have what happened here, August 11th and 12th. I mean, you have the extraordinary activism of, folks like Zion Bryant, Jelaine Smith, Heritage Center, shout out Andrea Douglas. I mean, really, kind of pushing this work forward. I think the role of my organization has really been to, provide some of the historical and educational resources to this conversation. We're simply committed to telling the truth about this history. And, we've definitely gotten some pushback because of that. There have been instances where, folks have, threatened our fundings, saying that, we shouldn't, use the words white supremacy, when we talk about the history of these monuments. And I think, where we are today, you can't have the conversation around monuments without also connecting it to this history of white supremacy.
That's right.
You talk about United Daughters as a Confederacy, and the work that they did, not only to get these monuments up at a time where Black rights were being overturned and suppressed, but then they engaged in a campaign where they changed the curricula offered in our public schools to de-emphasize the history of slavery and to talk about the greatness of individuals like Jefferson Davis, president of the Confederacy, individuals like Robert E. Lee who led the war for the Confederacy, for the military. Right. So, we try to spotlight, this very complicated history in a way that's just really truthful. And I think one of the things we've seen is that as people become more conscious of the truth, as people become kind of more aware of their surroundings and how, that part of town that you just didn't go to and nobody ever explained why, there's actually a history behind why you never went there, why your parents or grandparents never went there. People are thinking a little bit, I think, more deeply about how the history, connects to our experiences today. And, I think while we're not out there, as an activist organization, we do find that a lot of people turn to, our work when they're, writing op-eds, when they're writing news stories and articles. We try to do our best to provide the latest research, the latest scholarship, the latest historical thinking to as many people as possible. Like, that's the core of our mission. We're a public humanities organization. So first and foremost, our job is to get what's happening in university classrooms, college classrooms, to get that research and knowledge out to the people where they are, so that they can then make those really, really informed decisions about, what they want to see in their community.
Can I ask you a question? When it comes, you said they would even threaten to affect your funding. Why do they dislike the truth so much?
I mean, that's a complicated question. I'll say this was years ago. I mean, there have been a couple instances.
Oh, it's today. It's today.
I'll say the issue of where like funding was on the line. I think, we had published something early on about Sally Hemings that some people didn't like. We had published something about Sally Hemings connecting her to Thomas Jefferson that some Jefferson supporters didn't like. We've written about the United Daughters of Confederacy in ways that some people didn't like. But I think I think what it comes down to for a lot of people is that we, for a lot of white people especially, is that our identity is so often wrapped up in these myths that our family has passed down to us, has told us, and I'm saying we, but I'll be very specific, and I think a lot of white Americans, they can't separate their identity from these myths. There's a fear that if they were to suddenly acknowledge that these really horrible things occurred in the past and that their ancestors were responsible for it, that somehow that would diminish kind of who they are right now.
Right.
And
it does diminish who they are right now. Speaking as one of them, it diminishes who we are, but it's real, right? And I think that the defense of the white Southerner is that we didn't do it on purpose or what have you, and it's not true. Right. So if you look at our monuments and what went in to the Johnny Reb statue, or towards the reason Paul McIntyre worked with the Daughters of the Confederate, the way everything was done so it couldn't get taken apart, because it was private citizens bequeathing. It was all done intentionally. These things are done, and everything in the South has been done intentionally. This is as somebody whose parents, grandparents were publishers in a segregated town in Alabama. So what's so hard for us as white Southerners is that we have to come to grips with the level of intentionality in the evil that was done. And that does not feel good, because it makes you don't want to hate your grandfather. You don't have to, though. You just have to love the truth.
It's delicate.
But Giles, let me just say this. Let me just say this really quickly. I think we can let go of these myths, honestly, because there's so much more to this history. And so if we say Southern history starts at the point of European contact here, then we're looking at 4+ centuries of history, whereas Civil War that lasted 4 years. So we have the other 390 some years of shared history and culture that we could frame our identity around. And I think if we become more aware of that part of our history, if we even become aware of the parts of our history that we don't typically talk about. I mean, there were interracial white and Black political coalitions shortly after the Civil War that were getting work done. Like, they were almost too effective, to the point where you have the Danville race riot that occurred, trying to restore white voting power and diminish the Black vote. I mean, we have effective examples of this, right? That if we were to highlight, instead of this 4 years of myth that we focus on so much, if we talked about the shared history of food, if we talked about even in the civil rights movement, it took an interracial coalition to make those gains. There are things in U.S. history and Southern history in particular that white people can be proud of, and I would encourage any white listener to seek out those opportunities where you have ancestors who strove to be on the right side of history. Talk about, the abolitionists, talk about, the white civil rights activists, talk about the people that you would be proud to connect yourself with today.
But how do we do that when saying that my grandfather was a general in the Confederate Army is all they have? Like once we pull that away, they don't have anything else.
And let me just toss in another question because I know we're running out of time. I just wondered how much work your organization was doing with the Historic Resources Committee in Charlottesville, and maybe your personal or professional thoughts about the honorary street naming of African Americans in Charlottesville. A lot of people are for it, but there are many who oppose it.
So you're talking about the local Historic Resources Committee? Or are you talking about the state historic?
The local,
resources?
Charlottesville.
Yeah, so we haven't had direct involvement with the local Historic Resources Committee. I know there are individuals on that committee that represent other organizations that we've supported in the past. Again, we're a statewide organization, and so these issues are bubbling up all across Virginia. And one of the things, again, we just try to do is take a step back and look out for those that are doing really meaningful and thoughtful work and support them any way we can. So, if the city were to come to us, seeking additional resources for some work that they're doing, or if the county were to do the same, that's kind of when we would step in. There's usually an ask that's made of our organization.
Okay.
But yeah, we haven't been directly involved in the local Historic Resources Committee or really in the street name debate. But I will say, in my own humble personal opinion, I think it's important for us to acknowledge as many extraordinary local individuals as possible when it comes to naming spaces. I think too often we focus on the figures like an MLK that got the national spotlight, but MLK, as much as we think of Martin Luther King Jr. as being the leader of a movement, it was really people on the ground, local community members. Our grandmas are sitting in the kitchen, selling dinners,
selling plates,
making sure, people got to the poll. Those are the heroes that we really should lift up, I think, in our local communities. People are not going to forget about Martin Luther King,
right?
But they should also know about your grandmother or your great aunt or whomever else, in the local community that did that hard work that didn't get the media attention. So that's kind of my opinion on who we honor in our local spaces.
Thank you. And I didn't mean to jump in on Razor's question. Razor, what were you saying?
No, too late now, Miss Robinson.
It was more rhetorical.
I was trying to slide it in.
It was more rhetorical.
Next time you need to stand back and stand back.
Oh, Lord. We'll save that for next show.
Yeah, you gotta laugh to keep from crying.
I know, right? Hey, well, Justin, man, thanks for joining us, man. Please don't be a stranger. Anytime you guys have announcements, you need that community outreach. You know that WVAI, and in my humble opinion, the Charlottesville Inclusive Media Project, let us know. Giles, Sarad, Davenport, man, we are here to support and uplift, man.
I appreciate y'all. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. So, y'all ready to close this thing on out?
No.
Okay.
At that time?
Well, Clee may have something different to say.
No, I mean, we got to close
Soul
out. You was not ready. No, I'm not ready.
Soul Lounge on your heels at 3
I
o'clock.
don't believe in giving up nothing.
Hey, but definitely before we go, man, some loyal listeners shouted us out, and I want to make sure that I let y'all know about what's going on. Check out the Jefferson Center because there is an artist talk exhibition on Black women starting on October 17th. So go to that Jefferson School and check that out. Lola Fresh has a photography exhibit that's going to be there. Also, our sister Shelby Edwards on October 15th through 18th. Those tickets are available. She's doing a solo performance, virtual. Lost Home, Went Home.
Miss Holly's daughter.
Yep, that's right. Miss Holly Edwards' daughter, and she is doing a great work connected to A17 in Charlottesville. So, a couple of things going on there. So check out Live Arts for that, and check out Jefferson for the exhibition. All right, Miss Max. So on you.
Take us home.
Hey, I mean, I just, again, want to shout out our listeners. We appreciate you. There's no us without you. And so thank you for tuning in. And we always strive to give of our very best and to deliver some conversations that are truly thought-provoking and create some type of change in Charlottesville and beyond. And so, fellas, I think we've done no less than that today. Thank you to my team. Thank you to the guests. Thank you, Justin. We appreciate you sharing your day with us. Giles, thank you.
Nikki Giovanni, the queen.
That's right. Yeah. It was
Family friend.
great talking to her. So, best words I can give you guys is just everybody take care. Everybody take care of each other. Everybody just strive to be the very best, personal best that you can.